Welcome back to Detonation Point presented by Elastio. This week, we're excited to have on Elliott Franklin. Elliott is the Chief Information Security Officer at Fortitude Re and a cybersecurity leader with more than 2 decades of experience building and running security programs across industries that usually don't get talked about in the same sentence. Everything from Whataburger to global hospitality to reinsurance. He's known for taking a different view than most others in the industry, less focused on chasing the latest tools and more focused on discipline, fundamentals, and actually making security work inside complex businesses. And somewhere along the way, he went from hacking his high school grading system to becoming a guy companies call when they need cybersecurity right from the ground up. Elliott, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Very happy to be here.
So when I was in high school, I did not have the ability to hack my school's grading system because they didn't have one. So what I used to do was I was a terrible student, and now I'm coming clean. And I think my parents know this, but what I used to do is I would get like D's and F's in math and stuff like that because I was just not a very good student. And so what I would do is I would get the report card, and then I would take my pen and I would change those D's to B's, and then I would photocopy it. And I'd say, oh, I lost my report card. So they photocopied it for me and I gave it to them. The problem was it would happen over several months and I would forget the grades that I would previously give myself. And so then before I got caught. So in your school, they had some online system for grades?
Well, it wasn't online. I was like, there was no cloud back then.
Yeah.
It was a mainframe, but everything was definitely on-prem. But when both your parents are school teachers, you tend to be up at the school all hours of the day and night while they're working on their lesson plans and grading and such. So I would spend my time in the library, and was just happened to be connected into that mainframe system. And so as you're going through there and you're just looking curiously, how does this work? I'm a very logical person, looking through analytical and looking through the program and how things work, and found a little flaw in it, and was able to get in and print out all my grades and print out all the grades of and Social Security numbers and everything. I was like, no, you can't do that. So I immediately told, my dad, who was a principal, I was like, it shouldn't be like this. So they called the company that was supposed to be maintaining it. And then I worked for them for the next 4 years, going all throughout the state of Texas, securing the grade systems that they managed. So it was fun.
No kidding. And I would imagine you were probably an A student anyway, so you probably didn't need to change your grades like I would have.
Yeah. I passed. Let's just put it like that.
Okay.
I certainly excelled at certain subjects, but I'm not a good test taker either. So it was interesting.
Oh, no kidding. So Whataburger, is that the best burger that commercially you can buy today? Or is it In-N-Out?
Oh, that was the big thing when I was, when I was at the corporate office in San Antonio. In-N-Out first made their way into Texas about halfway through my tenure there and came into to the Dallas market. So it was certainly look. They both have their cult followings, right? I mean, people just grow up with them. They go there after football games and everything. And so I think it's more about the culture and the atmosphere.
I agree. And now Five Guys. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, and it was just like a local restaurant when I was growing up. And then that's exploded all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
So going back to the intro, I wanted to chat with you about something that I've seen and kind of want to get your take on it. So my primary business, 50 Consulting, we work with vendors of all kinds, primarily providing value back to folks that sit in your seat as a Chief Information Security Officer. But I have to imagine that CISOs all around the world get vendor fatigue. And the cybersecurity industry, you go to RSA, which I know you go to, and all it is new tools, new big promises. How much of that do you think is noise versus actual progress?
Yeah. And you know what? That's caused, I think we have allowed that. Certain security practitioners and others have allowed that to actually cause a lot of the pain and suffering that we have and a lot of the breaches is just going after all of the shiny, blinky objects. And so vendor fatigue, what I would call it is more, how do you have your framework? What is the framework? Do you have a framework for your security program? And is it a risk-based program? Because if you're going through and you're looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework and you've gone through and done a risk assessment, or you paid someone to come in and do a risk assessment, pick the top 3 and work through those. And so unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, not all of those solutions require technology. Unfortunately, people don't like to look at the people and the process part first before they just jump into a technology. A, you probably don't have anybody that can manage that cool new toy you bought. So it becomes shelfware. And then B, it makes the vendor look bad. It makes the technology in general look bad. And it makes you look bad that you're spending the company money. And then yet we still got popped and we had that tool, but we just didn't have it configured. So absolutely. I mean, the fatigue is real. Look, reaching out on LinkedIn or emails or cold calls. I realize these people, have a job to do in terms of sales, But if we took all those calls, we would never be able to do our job. And so I think also these vendors need to make sure they're doing their research to see where do they fit. Are they calling you to solve a problem you don't have? Do they understand your environment and your landscape and the architecture that you've got? And how many tools are best of breed versus, versus a bundle? And do I actually need to buy point solutions or can I use a bundle? There's so many options out there.
The whole solution without a problem is an interesting thing for us because when we meet with prospective clients, they'll talk about all of this things that they've been able to do, and we all ask that very questions like, okay, so what are you solving for? And sometimes you realize that whether the CEO fell in love with the idea or something like that, where it hasn't been pressure tested. How often do you sit through pitches where at the end of it you're like, I don't even really know what you're attempting to accomplish with whatever it is, or do you have a pretty good screening process to avoid getting to that level?
No, you're right. That definitely happens. In fact, what I'll typically tell them at the end is, this is a phenomenal solution. I just don't know why any company would ever buy it. And I don't mean that to be rude, but because I've got so many other things that are higher priority risk, the problem you're solving is so focused on this one little area. So, like threat intelligence was one of those where I'm like, you could tell me the exact server IP address and everything that you were fixing to hack, but what am I going to do with that information? I guess I just have to turn the server off. Like, I don't know what else, unless I've got my layers already in place with identity access management and different things. So some of the tools, they sound phenomenal and they really do solve problems. But wow, I would think you'd have to have a 2,000 person security team in order to take advantage of that.
So if you're going to walk into a company today and you've obviously transitioned through various different types of companies and businesses, and you had to rip out half the security stack, what would you cut first? Is there anything that you see that is just like grist that just gets in the way?
That's a great question because that is what I come in and do is just kind of rip out. I've come into some places that have been very fortunate. They have every name brand tool in the book, but I'm like, I don't know that we need that for this size of company. So again, if you're depending on zero trust, did you buy some expensive zero trust tool that you don't need because you're now all in the cloud or that you don't have on-prem infrastructure? But if there's one that I would come think of right away and pull out, I don't know. There's a lot of I'll say old school, maybe vulnerability scanners that don't really provide the value they should. I think that might be a place to focus on this, first, which might be interesting. A lot of folks might think differently. I'm trying to think of email security gateways that I've pulled out right away because they're the old style with the MX redirect rather than the API plugin and integration. So maybe not just completely rip it out, but more like replace it and modernize it.
And there also, you're talking about budget and stuff, the perception that more spending equals better security. In your experience, how often is that actually true?
No, I mean, you do get what you pay, what you pay for with certain tools, but there's a lot of great open source options. There's a lot of
Mhm.
community driven options that you have out there from a price standpoint. Also, certainly taking advantage of some of the different, ISACs, if you're a member of one of the ISACs and kind of collaborating there and maybe look at buying power from that standpoint in terms of bringing prices down. There's a lot of great competition with the tools. Typically, if you're looking for, whatever it is, your top risks are, whether that's a secure web gateway, secure email gateway, type system, some of the basics, identity and access management, secrets manager, privileged access, those kind of things. There's a lot of competition. You can get folks to kind of compete against themselves if you need to bring your price down. And then again, sometimes you might have to take a bundle, something that can do 3 or 4 things okay, not great, but okay, to at least get you in the door. I've done that many times. I'll come in and buy a tool that I know it's not the best one out there, but for the company and the size I'm at, it will help me demonstrate the value to my leadership. And once they see the value in that one, I only sign a 1 year, I can flip it over and upgrade and go to a better tool after that. But you just can't come in and ask for, a $5 million security budget and go from 0 to that until you prove to the business, the value you're going to bring. And that's been my experience.
You mentioned early on people process tools. I first learned that in 2017 when I was trying to build our Secret Services Global Investigative Operations Center. And a guy that I respected a lot, Mark Norberg, told me, he said, you have to focus on people process tools. And if you go backwards, you're going to run into massive problems. From your experience, do you think that that's where people fall in love with that new shiny object, that tool, and they abandon people process tools to think that they could just shortcut it and get right to tools?
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I've done it myself many times, so I have to learn the lesson as well. But yeah, absolutely, especially if it's a painful experience. Like, if you're bleeding, if there's some sort of breach or even close to breach that you have going on and you just want to go buy something to hopefully stop the bleeding. you're kind of in crisis mode, or you're just trying to make the leadership happy as well. But that's going to come back to bite you. You may win, just for the short term, but long term, you've got to have a well thought out plan. And now there's really no excuse. I mean, many years ago with roadmaps, where do I pick? Do I pick a framework? How do I create a roadmap? Who, do I listen to this big four? Do I listen to this industry research firm? What is my board going to require? But now it's much easier, I think, in terms of being able to just look at a framework, pick a framework. Most boards are familiar with like the NIST framework, and do your risk assessment, and then say, look, here's our gaps that we have. Here are the risks. Here are the ones we feel we can accept, and here are the ones we feel we need to remediate, and here's how we can do that. And the first thing, making sure that when you introduce a project, like if you're going to do a big identity project, that you don't pitch the tool first, you pitch the capabilities and the capacity. Hey, here's the capabilities it'll bring us, but we only have capacity to do a third of this unless you're able to add on 2 more full-time employees. And if you don't get those right up front, then just say this project needs to be punted because we're not going to be successful. Too many times I've done it the opposite. I'll say, hey, we need to do identity. Here's the platform, that we need to do. And then we get it in place. I'm like, oh man, I need 2 more people, whether they're contractors or FTEs, to come in and help me. And I should have asked for that first so that you see the whole picture when you're presenting it.
So you mentioned breaches, and which is what we're always trying to protect against, whether it's a leak, breach, however you want to define it. And it just depends on how it happens, of course. But when it does happen, how often is it really a failure of advanced defenses versus just not doing the basics well? The blocking and tackling that you mentioned early on.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about 2 recent ones that that have occurred in the last couple of weeks with OAuth tokens and those kind of things, going back to non-human identities. And so it's the basics, and everybody on my team gets tired of hearing me say that if the basics were easy, everybody would have them done, and a lot of vendors wouldn't be in business. And so certainly, I think most of them are. We've not covered the basics because, again, they're not easy. So do you have an inventory of all your non-human identities? Are you alerted when they're used outside of the norm? Would you know if somebody stole one of your OAuth tokens? Are you able to reset those? And that's not necessarily easy depending on your environment. And I understand, super, super large environments, it can be very challenging. But yeah, I do. I think that a lot of the basics, if you talk about patching, vulnerability management, application whitelisting, and such, again, the identity and the zero trust is making sure that only the folks have access to the data that need it. I think that can prevent a lot of these breaches, and you wouldn't have to have a lot of the fancy tools, although the tools are nice. But again, are they configured correctly? How many times have I come into a company and they've had these tools? I came into one company and they had, let's just say, a leading EDR installed on all their devices. And when I went into the console, none of the blocks were actually turned on. They had installed it and then left, and nothing had been done so it wasn't actually protecting the company. And they thought, I mean, they're paying the renewals. It was an industry leading EDR. But again, none of the actual blocks had been turned on, the rules inside of it. So it's almost like that firewall that's wide open. So thankfully they didn't have a breach. But if they would have, again, they had the tools. What was the problem? The excuse that there had been no follow through or project plan from a deployment of that.
How much of cybersecurity today do you think is driven by fear, whether it's vendors selling it or executives reacting to headlines?
Yeah, again, I think that's company culture. You're right. I mean, look at the recent the hype, and maybe some of it's well deserved around the Mythos,
Yeah.
scanner. And what did that do from a board standpoint in terms of kind of being, I said early on, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt model is not what I was going to use. I worked at healthcare, and sure, I could say HIPAA, but at some point they're going to stop listening, and they should. And so again, it needs to be risk-based. What is the risk if I do this? And what is the risk if I don't? Pay me now, pay me later. But I'm not going to do the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Just here are the facts. I am a risk manager, and you as a board, as an executive leadership team, you have many risks. You have risks all over, whether it be financial risk or employee risk or food safety risk at the restaurants or different things. And so this cyber is just one of them. And I can't be selfish and think that it's bigger than the others. I just need to present you the evidence, and I can certainly give you my recommendations, but you as the board or the leadership team have to accept that. So yeah, I don't think that I don't think it works. And if it does, it'll work once or twice, and then it might make you look not too good when you come back and you've spent all this money, and again, your program is still not up to where it needs to be from the industry average.
So you were talking about risk, and a lot of organizations say they're risk-based, but still trying to secure everything equally. Is true risk prioritization happening from where you can see anywhere, or is it, obviously I'm sure in some organizations, but is that still a main problem?
No, you're absolutely right. You want to, secure everything, and that's just not possible. So I realize it's easier said than done, and it's easier at smaller to mid-sized organizations, such as where I'm at, that you can have a well-defined business, the business impact analysis, the BIA documents. You can have the BCDR documents. You can understand truly what are our critical assets and which ones are not, and be able to really focus on securing those critical assets from a risk standpoint. And then you look at emerging risks as well. But ultimately, going back to what are our most critical applications, most critical data, and we can't treat it all the same. We just can't. And it's silly because you don't do that with the infrastructure. You have dev and test and prod. You have different environments, and you hopefully spend less on your other two environments that they're running on cheaper, slower storage. And so it should be the same way with the security structure. How are are we securing everything the same? Because you're going to burn out your folks. You're not going to have enough tools, and so you've got to really decide what are you going to focus on. What's the most important to protect?
So you've built many programs almost from scratch or from scratch. Is there usually a first uncomfortable truth that you have to talk to leadership about?
Yes, I think this is the same pretty much everywhere, but for 20 plus years, when you go in, it feels like I'm coming in being that big brother. And what I mean by that is, you're going to uncover things that somebody hasn't done well, or maybe they've said they've done and they haven't done. And so it's how do you come in and say, this isn't about a person. This is just like, again, it's risk. Hey, I've come in, I've done my standard, 30, 60, 90. I've done my own risk assessment. I've run some scans. I've looked around at the architecture and the infrastructure. And did you realize that, I hate the low hanging fruit, but these are areas that, wow, I can't believe a company of your size hasn't done these simple things. And most of the time they don't even cost money. But yeah, that's usually the uncomfortable truth, is coming in and saying, this has not been done correctly up to industry standard. It can easily be done. And usually, again, that first couple, there's no cost. And so people are like,
Mhm.
what? I thought that was done, or we were told that was done, or we had that segmented, or we had those default passwords changed, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, no, actually, that's not true. And so sometimes you have to be very delicate in how you do, because the person that made all those decisions is still with the organization, and you don't want to burn that bridge. So it can be a very delicate conversation.
One of the challenges I think sometimes the industry faces what is you have some folks that, for whatever reason, I had somebody that worked for me that I would say he would speak Dolphin because he knew nobody else could speak Dolphin. And so then therefore people would kind of glaze over and not really know exactly and I think some of it was intentional. From
Yes.
your perspective, how often do you think folks over engineer security to prove value instead of actually reducing risk?
Gosh, that's such a good question. That I see that so often, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is. Different folks, different reasons, different companies. I'm wondering. Sometimes I think it's again who you're partnering with. Sometimes you're partnered with a reseller, a consulting firm, and they're trying to secure their continued contract. And so they're trying to complicate things and make it where you're going to need them for a very long time. I certainly have seen that happen. But you're right. Some of it can just be the person really not knowing. And so I know I've come into a couple of cases where that was the case when I came in. There had not been anyone in the company that could really provide a balance. I just call it a balance, not necessarily a bad thing, but just a balance to that other person in terms of the thought process and the deployment process and the architecture behind what they were suggesting that they needed. And some folks, again, depending on their background, it's not a bad thing, but depending on their background, if they come from, like I said, like maybe Department of Defense or something, they want to secure everything 100% all the time. And for example, like at Whataburger, I'm like, look, guys, we're just selling burgers. Like, we don't need to lock things down like we're the government. And so, here we need to focus on, credit card numbers, PCI. That's really what we need to focus on. And so the other things we can worry about later. And so I think that's where some of it comes in as well. Their background, wherever they came from, they want to focus all in a certain area. And you just have to take a step back and say security is security for the most part, with some variances of depending on the industry that you're at.
One of the things that I've seemed to think is getting better, but I'm interested in your thoughts, do you think boards and executives actually understand cybersecurity risk, or are they primarily managing the optics?
I think I've been pretty fortunate with the boards I've worked on. There's certainly a mix. And I think some of that is up to us as well. I mean, yes, they are on multiple boards. They're hearing from multiple different folks. And so they'll come to you asking questions that they hear, at their other meetings, that you've got to be, ready to defend or ready to quickly say, I don't know, and I'll find out. So I think it's getting better. But again, I guess it depends on the company. But from my standpoint, I think it's getting better. I don't think it's as much optics. I mean, look, some of them have gone out because they thought the SEC was going to require it. but some of them have gone out and got, the different board certifications, whatever that might be, NACD or the different ones that are out there from having some cyber knowledge on the board. And so I think that they're getting better in terms of actually truly understanding it like a M&A decision, like a financial risk. They truly are trying to understand cyber better instead of just saying, let them give us 3 slides, don't ask any questions, and we'll just kind of move on. I think it is getting better that they actually do care and they want to truly understand it.
And you kind of have to. I mean, if you're on a board and you're representing protecting shareholders, not to know what could be extinction level events. If that's not something that's front and center, then you probably shouldn't be on the board. And I do know like the NACD and others have done a really good job of trying to educate. And I know that boards are trying to bring on at least some people that have those kinds of experiences. It was something that you mentioned about Whataburger that was interesting, as you said, we're trying to protect payment cards. You understood what the crown jewels of the organization are and like what would hurt the most if we got hit. What's the decision you've made as a CISO that would make other security teams uncomfortable? It sounds like you had some of those.
Oh, yes. That's a great question. I've got a couple of different answers I can give on that. I always tell people I'm not your normal CISO in that regard. And because a lot of times people will come to me expecting me to say no to something they want me to say no to. And I'm like, well, I mean, is the business going to be profitable for that? Is the business going to make more money? Then we should figure out a way to make it happen. I remember one company where they had the web filters so locked down. This is wild. I still can't believe this. They had the web filter so locked down. I did some analysis. I went to the logs and I did some log analysis for a couple of weeks. And then I went to the leadership team and I said, guys, we need to open up all of these sites because your employees on your teams are spending hours on company computers searching for ways around the web filter to try to get to their ESPN or their this site or that site. I said, they're adults. Let them do their job. If they have a performance issue, call them out for it. But in my mind, there's no security reason why we can't allow them to go to these shopping sites and these sports sites and these different sites. They are here longer than they are at home. Let them be adults and do their job. And so after a year, we flipped our web filter and we opened like every site on the planet that that didn't have security implications. The ones that they said productivity blockers and all that. No, we opened all of those up, and actually then we went back and did the study again in a few weeks and saw that the people, again, they would spend minutes on those sites, not hours, trying to find ways around it. And so that was one example. Another would be with AI recently, in terms of a lot of company going immediately and just blocking all AI categories from their web filter. Again, we took a practical approach. I said, we're going to be behind if we don't allow this. So what's a secure way we can do it? How about we pick the top 2 or 3 models that we feel are going to be the most, useful for our company. Let's put some guardrails on those. Let's, get an enterprise account. Let's lock it down to just those, but let's allow them to use these AI models. And we've embraced that. So yeah, those are some of I'm not sure other security leaders would feel the same way that I do in those areas. It's got to be balanced, but you know what? They make money. I don't typically. So I've got to help them.
One of the things that it was interesting to me is you mentioned AI and what AI means. Some people have just this straight relationship. AI is Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT. So when I've gone in and talked to some organizations about other types of AI, human in the loop AI, built off of human expertise, not off of data, they look at you like, what are you talking about? Because everybody's just been so accustomed to what we know as like Gen AI as the only AI. How far away do you think we are from getting over that sort of hurdle, or is it still probably years away?
Well, I want to make sure I understand the question. To some degree, this was me up until, I don't know, maybe just a month or two ago, but are you asking kind of the difference between just chat? Like a lot of people just think, Gemini and Claude and that they just chat versus actually doing something and performing tasks. Is that what you're asking?
Or also that when people talk AI, they're not only talking about Gen AI, but there are other types of AI that can be used in a manner that is auditable. It's defensible, and it's not just, hey, I'm just going to put a bunch of data into a black box and kind of hope. So then therefore we have a company policy, no AI, period, end of discussion. And you go, that's
Yeah, that makes sense. No, you're exactly right. In fact, we had to go audit our third parties because how many SaaS providers are now throwing AI into all of their tools, and so that's fine as long as we understand it. We have a contract with them. We understand how our data is going to be used with their AI models and such that they have. But no, you're exactly right. It's not just It's not just the chat. It's, the code, codex, Cloud Code, all
Mhm.
these different coding models that you can be writing code and producing full applications with the AI. And then how are those going to be patched, maintained, updated? Those kind of questions. It's not just like buying something off the shelf and then making decisions for the company based on those. You've got to make sure that the stuff that no one ever wants to talk about, the boring paperwork, the governance
Mhm.
behind, again, we go back to the policies. Do we have the process, the people in the process first? And so making sure we have those governance documents in place. Again, the NIST AI risk management framework is great to start from that. You don't have to start from scratch. And even if you did, you could just have Claude or somebody write it for you. And
Right.
making sure that it actually applies to your environment, that it's defensible to your point in an audit. But yeah, that's how far away. I mean, that's the magic question everyone's asking.
Yeah.
It's moved much faster than I ever thought it would. And so I can't even say, is that 2 years away, right? Like you said, 2 years, I can't imagine where we'll be.
All right, I got one last question for you. You've been at a bunch of different companies, different industries. So when a company says we take security seriously, what's the quickest way you can tell if that's true or lip service?
Whew. Um, I guess a couple of different ways. One is when you say we take security seriously, again, that doesn't mean immediately budget. I don't need to just ask budget, but
Hmm.
more about reporting structure and governance, meaning how buried is security in the organization in terms of, where does it report? But that, you say, well, does that matter? But then what about the actual authority of the security team? Meaning if we put a policy in place, is it going to be approved? How much resistance are we going to get? So if you say we take security seriously and you maybe have somebody that's got three different titles and one of them happens to be security person and they're able to dedicate a third of their time to it, if they're lucky. Again, maybe you could have every tool in the world, but do you have somebody focused on security? Because so many times I've come into roles where they say, you've got the accountability with no authority. And so you're accountable for the role, but you have no authority over it. So good luck, good luck getting anything accomplished. And I've certainly had those roles. And so you can usually quickly find out within 6 months that you probably need to maybe start looking for another opportunity, because unfortunately, even through the interview process and such, you're never going to really find that out. So now it's usually easier. You can visit with folks on LinkedIn. You can talk to employees there to kind of get an understanding of what is the culture for security at this organization. Some are great. Some top-down CEO calls it out in the monthly town halls, really emphasizes the phishing tests and everything, and wants folks to know that it's serious and that it should be. It should help the company move forward if you're doing it right. It shouldn't be a hindrance to the company. It shouldn't be blocking you from being productive. But there are certainly those that truly, I have definitely had jobs where one job I was told, just go watch Netflix. We don't really need you in any of these meetings. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not real sure why you hired me then. But that was kind of a wake up moment for me.
Well, one last question, I promise. You brought up something that I thought about a lot in working and talking and being friends with CISOs, the movement. That it's a year and a half or 2 years and people are moving. Is that trend staying the same, or are you seeing longer lifespans at organizations in the industry? Because at least a couple of years ago, everybody I talked to said, "Yeah, you're going to take this job for 2 years. You're going to move somewhere else," and there's just like this constant kind of bouncing around.
Yeah, again, I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'm really passionate about it. I think one of them is the culture, and so if you're in an
Mhm.
organization where the culture is just not welcoming to security, to your point, it's just not a top priority, and not even a top priority. It's just not given any. You don't see any growth. You're not able to advance the program at all. Then I think that's one of the reasons. It's certainly some of it. Maybe somebody's dangling and saying, the grass is greener over here. We're going to pay you more. I think that has to do some of it. But the third thing is and again, I'm really passionate about this, is the mental health aspects. And we've had multiple folks that have had heart attacks and different things because of the stress that the company is putting on them or they're allowing to be put on themselves. And I've been in both of them, where we think if one breach and it's all my fault and the whole company is going to fold, and you just can't live with that. And so you leave and you go somewhere else where you repeat that same thing. So some of it can be the stress we're putting on ourselves, or that our board is putting on us. That, it's all your fault. Are we secure?
Yeah.
If we get one hack, you're going to get fired. And again, if that's the case, such as life, you move on and you find another role. So is that changing? I think it is. And I think you're starting to see folks stay longer because of all the questions kind of that you've asked me prior. Like, the boards are accepting it more. The leadership teams, it's rising to a true peer level in the organization. And I think more and more of the enterprise CISOs are becoming are business leaders and not just
Mhm.
security leaders. And so I think that all of those things combined are helping us mature the industry or the profession and being able to stay longer at the companies. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. No, that echoes with some of the folks that I've talked to about the maturing of the role, where it is a true C-suite kind of position. If I had a last question, it would be about the relationship between the CIO and the CISO, but I guess that's probably organization dependent as well. So I will steal one last question. Where do you think the CISO should sit in the organization?
Yeah, not a trick question at all. I would say for my entire career, every company I've reported to the CIO. I do see that change. Some CISOs are reporting into the chief legal officer, the chief compliance officer, chief risk officer, and then ironically, I'm seeing a number of CISOs move into the CIO role and then hire their backfill and hire a CISO. It really does depend. I think there are real true conflicts of interest reporting into the CIO. Certainly, if you've got that transparency in your organization, and you have to be successful, where you have a good relationship with the chief legal officer or the chief compliance officer, I think that's okay, because ultimately, when you look at the CIA triad, the CIO is interested in really the availability of tools and then pushing new products out as fast as you can, or new capabilities. And then, the CISO worries about, the confidentiality and integrity of that data in those systems. And so if they're trying to push something out super fast and it's not gone through the other two checks, there is a natural conflict there. But I think most of the time, we're adults, we're professionals. If you have that good relationship, you can have a healthy conflict as long as you're just bringing up the facts. And that's where I think, if it goes back to not my opinion, but here are the risks, and you've laid out the risks, it's hard to argue with that. But I think too often we bring our personal biases into it. And then, it's that's a bad person. They're making a bad decision, rather than, here's the risk. If you sign off on that risk acceptance, I can sleep just fine at night.
Yeah. Well, Elliott, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I think what really stands out for me is that in an industry that's constantly chasing what's next, you've stayed grounded in what actually works. And that discipline around the basics is probably more rare than it should be. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing a perspective that cuts through a lot of the noise. And thank you so much to all of our listeners. If you got any value, and I'm sure you did, out of this conversation, please make sure to follow, share, send it to all of your friends in the industry. We certainly appreciate it. Elliott, thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for this week's episode of Detonation Point presented by Elastio. We'll see you next week. Thank you.